specifically how humans can interact with AI and how we can ensure that humanity benefits from AI and all that entails. The company was the pioneer of reinforcement learning with human feedback. Reinforcement learning with human feedback is what Sam Altman called the game changer between GPT 3.5 and ChatGPT. So from 20,000 users to 150 million users. And really what RLHF is it's reinforcement learning with human feedback. And the feedback is either self-reported feedback, plus, I like this one or I don't like this one, or it's behavioral feedback. And we really focus on behavioral feedback. Why? Because behavioral feedback shows you more about what is behind the granularity of the thought process. One of our large customers in the LLM space is the largest nonprofit answering questions about cancer. And every day, as you could well imagine, they have 40,000 interactions. And every day there are new articles, there are new reports, there are new academic papers about progress being made in cancer. And of course, the phones light up and everybody wants to know how this is going to affect their loved one, themselves or their loved one, right? And so having the ability to have exceedingly small cohorts, including a cohort of one, and we'll talk about cohorts of one because we're going to talk about air, sea, and land here in a moment. But having a cohort of one allows for this fine-tuning that Jason so aptly talked about, to happen in a very small environment and yet pervade throughout the entire Cancer Society's entire content management system. Right? So literally the first step this Cancer Society has each morning is they have 3 directors that read the articles that have come out within the last 24 hours. And they each make small corrections or changes to how the LLM's output or a reaction, a prompt and a reaction, and they'll make minor changes. And that literally can be then pushed throughout the entire content management system in real time to allow for the organization to have a cohesive voice. Right? And much like what Yurts is doing is to have a RAG-like environment where you're using this information in a real-time basis and correcting throughout the entire massive database, including documents that might be terribly old. And so it's a really interesting time for this. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on LLMs. I'm wildly intrigued, and I'd love to talk to you about them more, because I do think this RAG technique, when sort of moved to the next generation of, if you've ever tried to play chess with ChatGPT, it's a miserable fucking failure. It gives you the first move that's absolutely brilliant, because it's studied, right, what is the greatest opening, and it's looked at every possible document. But you'll quickly realize 3 or 4 moves in, it doesn't remember where the pieces are, and occasionally it moves its rook in a diagonal fashion. And so my little company, because we're focused on human AI alignment, has really focused on things like grounding techniques that use RAG-like, but instead of pulling from a single database or multiple databases, instead pulls from a real-time simulation of a real-world environment, like a chess game. What are the rules of a chess game? right? So that when you play chess with an LLM, you now know that the rook can move not in diagonal fashion, right? You know where that simulation is playing out, and it gives you some really interesting ways in which to reduce, mitigate inaccuracies, hallucinations, and the like. Not really what I was hoping to talk about today. I was hoping to talk about one of our largest customers is the DoD and the French DGA. And the DoD has hired us specifically to create eVTOL training. The reason they're really interested in eVTOL training is that today we have 3 certified eVTOL pilots. If you ask Joby, they think that by the year 2030, they're going to need 40,000. If you ask Supernal, they think they're going to have 20,000. And if you ask Archer, they believe they're going to be somewhere around 30 or 40,000 as well. Right? And if you do the math on how we train pilots from a trainer to a trainee, you quickly realize there's no way that this maths, right? Because in traditional pilot training, you have someone who's a trainer and someone who's a trainee, and you schedule a time to sit in a simulator or sit in a plane together, and one gives you sort of an evaluation and then maybe directs you on seeing some strengths and weaknesses, and you make some progress, right? Well, that doesn't really work if you think about where we need to get to in terms of scaling this enterprise. And so the DoD came to us and said, you know, here's our problem. We're not going to be able to scale to the numbers that we need. Even in the DoD, in the limited DoD, we're not going to be able to do this. And so we need someone to create, with you know, the cooperation of Joby, Archer, and Supernal, a pilot training program. The key to this pilot training is that it needs to be asynchronous, right? Because the DoD spends about $2 million a year on each pilot candidate. And 60% of those pilot candidates drop out over the time of this, mostly due to sort of economic pressures, time pressures, you know, just it's not working for me type of pressures. And so one of the first things they ask for is an asynchronous environment. We don't need to have a trainer and trainee in the same space at the same time, because that's part of the challenge of keeping people in the program. Secondly, we want kind of a filtering effort where we can filter people out of this early if they don't have the skills, if they don't have the aptitude, if they don't have the enthusiasm for this. And then thirdly, you know, we want to be able to create an AI that can evaluate against a known good curriculum, but direct in a hyper-personalized fashion on a cohort of 1. And in doing so, create a director that expedites, becomes very efficient in how we train eVTOL pilots. And eVTOL pilots, it's not like you're flying a Sikorsky helicopter. It is, in fact, the same controls. But if you think about what an eVTOL pilot's going to have to deal with, they're not in a sanitized environment, per se. An airport's nice and sanitized, right? There's lots of space, and there's no buildings that get in the way, there's no wind shear, there's a lot of things that you don't have to really think about in an airport. Well, in a vertiport, an airport for these eVTOLs, there's a lot of things that, you know, sort of become quite complex, especially things like energy usage. Right? This is a battery-powered thing. Noise. You know, Joby's aiming for an aircraft that has the sound profile of most of our dryers that clothes dry our clothes. Right? And so training a pilot to land and to take off with a very specific noise profile, with a very specific energy profile, in an environment with, buildings and wind shear and all sorts of, sort of unsanitized environments, is a really classic, complex problem. And that's where AI really works very well, is you take a multi-agent reinforcement learning approach with real-time human feedback to learn exactly what the strengths and weaknesses of that trainee pilot are. And you can start them in an environment that might be as simplistic as like a Microsoft simulator, and then hot swap them into like a CAE, higher fidelity simulation, then into like a manufacturer's simulation, and then finally into the aircraft itself. Because one of the challenges we all know that are going to happen with eVTOLs is they're going to progress to becoming mostly autonomous. And how do humans, Jason nailed this point earlier, thank you. How do humans trust AI? We share experiences with it, right? We see it working and we trust it. And so as we sort of evolve with eVTOLs, and we move from simulations into aircraft, and then become full-on pilots, right? We want to see what the AI is suggesting, is recommending. Even when we're full-born pilots, all of the manufacturers are pretty keen to keep that kind of training, because it's kind of a critical factor in the changes that will probably happen pretty rapidly in that space. So we've created this AI multi-agent reinforcement learning with human feedback simulation tool. It runs on Microsoft Simulator. It runs on all of the CAE packages. It also runs on Joby, Archer, and Supernova, their simulation tools. We're not in the aircraft yet because it's pretty sacred space right now, and there are literally 3 certified pilots in the world, though those 3 certified pilots have all spent more than 100 hours in our simulated trainer, because part of the AI's learning and fine-tuning is really based on having a reference design, a curriculum that can be heavily biased towards experts, right? Because let's face it, experts, AI is incredibly smart, but if you can have an AI apprentice to an expert, you can get to better results on AI and using significantly less data. Most of the academic research says somewhere between 10 and 100 times less data. And you can do so at an order of magnitude 10 times faster. And so whether you're learning to drive a car, jump out of an airplane, fly an eVTOL, work an excavator, I think a lot of these tools will very soon become sort of this AI apprenticeship. Not just does the AI learn from us, but we learn from the AI, and that is sort of a bi-directional improvement in process. And when you think about that, how it might apply to many things in our lives, it becomes quite intriguing. And the beauty of this kind of platform is that we are working alongside AI. In most instances, we don't even know that it exists. In the cancer environment with the LLM, the modifications that the 3 directors make are modifications to emails sent to the team on an overview of the articles written in the last 24 hours. And those changes pushed through the prompt into the LLM and the response, and then the changes that the directors make might be verb tense change, or it might be something simple where they're, downgrading an adjective or whatever. Right? Then get percolated throughout the rest of the content management system. Even in the user experience of the trainee in the pilot, trainee for eVTOL pilot. So the first set of skills, they're directing a glide slope to a landing facility. That's typically the first easiest kind of, hit this this target, hit this speed, decrease power usage, but stay within this funnel. And the evaluator agent can look and see exactly how well they're doing against that curriculum. It can then push to the director agent to say, energy usage was a little high, or noise was a little bit outside of the bounds, or went outside of the funnel, so let's try this again, but let's sort of, serious gamify this. Let's push this, because they've really got these three elements, these three aspects, they perfected them early on. Let's try them in conjunction with other factors, including exigencies and the like. Right? And so you can push wannabe pilots quicker towards either becoming great pilots, or failing out of the program, or finding other things to do. And so I think that's one of the really exciting bits of AI right now, is it has the ability for these pilots to even query via sort of an LLM grounded against that simulation, say, how can I do better? What did I miss? And the LLM can respond in natural language and provide kind of the input that can be reviewed by perhaps a supervisor or a super trainer or the like, but also can be understood and part of a permanent record of that pilot, the trainee's progress.
How common, are there other competitors in this particular market that you're in? And it seems like this tool should be pretty quickly out to train people. When's it going to be where we're funneling people into that training program?
I think there's a lot of folks that are thinking about doing this sorts of thing. Right now, LLMs is the sexiest beast on the planet, right? That's really the focus. And the truth of the matter is, it is fucking cool. It really is. But I think where we're going to see AI become more prevalent is on decision optimization agents and adaptive learning type tools and operator AI assistance type programs where you're augmenting human teams. I envision that every major corporation, DoD and the like, will have a version of Mistral or one of the open source tools, because they get a little bit wary of sharing data with OpenAI, and so they'll have this in a sandbox type environment because they don't want an adversarial interface perhaps, or access to people that shouldn't have access, so they'll tightly sandbox it, and they might have a very tightly controlled application of an LLM in a large corporation in the future. But I don't think, much like I was talking to some of the founders of Dropbox, Dropbox went to IBM after their first year of operation and said, by the way, you have 22,000 of your employees that are paying us $5 a month. And you probably want to consolidate that and kind of, have an IBM account as opposed to, sort of reimbursing 22,000 of your employees on this. So, I think we'll see that sort of consolidation in play. But I do think that the larger opportunities for some of these, and perhaps Yurts is going to do this, is to move from sort of creating a really cool, trusted LLM environment to then sort of broadening it into decision optimization. So things like, we've queried this. Now let's go and pull a RAG or RAG to simulation environment where I can also look at an ERP data and CRM data and 15 different databases, including GL, and say, here's how I'm going to interact with that customer. Not just here's how I'm going to speak with them, but here's how we're going to structure a deal, and that will spit out both a contract or an addendum or the like, right? And that's sort of where this becomes a whole lot more interesting in my eyes, rather than right now it's just kind of cool. Where it becomes really useful is when it can actually provide recommendations on how to do business efficiently.
So you brought up the concept of risk, and so I find it fascinating. First of all, really cool use cases, but in both of your examples,
Yeah.
You're talking about highly regulated environments with a lot of liability.
Yeah.
I'm curious, at a 30,000-foot view, as a founder,
Yeah.
when does that concept come into the vocabulary? When it goes from, when you start thinking about things like liability or regulations or those sorts of things?
So, as I mentioned, 47 different investments. One of the investments I made is in a company called EasyOp. And EasyOp was one of the pioneers of natural language generation. We're back almost 20 years. EasyOp went after the most regulated environment in the world. What EasyOp does is it takes phase 3 human new drug and vaccine trial data and converts it into an FDA application. In the old days, 2 years ago, I love doing that. In the old days, in the ancient old days, 2 years ago, you would spend $3 million. You have a new drug going through trial. You spend $3 million for E&Y to sort of gather all of the data, machinate it. The average time to get to FDA application was 28 weeks. Today, we can do that in about 4 hours. Right? And so imagine from a philosophical perspective, getting new drugs and vaccines to market in 4 hours instead of 28 weeks, you're going to save some lives. And so taking on those really tough regulatory kind of environments, and there are none tougher than perhaps FDA new drug, is kind of, I think, where, if I could be slightly critical of Sam Altman and many of the larger LLM players, they didn't really think a lot about that. And so, and to come out with products that were full of fashion and not much function, I think perhaps did a little bit of disservice. But there are companies out there, like EasyOp, that are, using RAG-like technology to ensure the lack of hallucinations. They're using kind of a hybrid LLM plus, sort of a system whereby, the data sort of checks upon itself, and in those kind of highly regulated environments, you can make enormous progress really quickly, especially when you start to you start to see that productivity lift and the trust that is earned over those 2 years by the medical writing team. You know, initially when we launched this product 6 or 7 years ago, you know, the medical writers were like, holy shit, this is gonna take our jobs. And the reality was, you know, the top of the discovery funnel for new drugs went from, you know, tens every year at a company like Eli Lilly to hundreds. Right? An order of magnitude leap in the number of top of the funnel drugs. And so suddenly the medical writers are like, well, you know, it takes 15 years to become a medical writer. You have PhDs and an MD in order to be a medical writer at a large pharmaceutical company. And so suddenly having these kinds of tools is sort of working through that progress and having that kind of fine tuning where literally, you know, Eli Lilly and Novartis and GSK all have different styles, and so they want those styles to pervade throughout all of their FDA applications. Right? Even though their FDA applications are pretty highly structured beasts, they want to use their own language. They want it to have the tone of the organization. And so fine-tuning those things in a highly regulated environment is kind of risky, but you know, if you can do it enough times and people start to trust it, yeah, it's still, when I say it goes through 4 hours, that's just the easy up part. Then it goes and meets the lawyers and, you know, and everybody else that has to sort of check off. But they've taken it from 28 weeks to about 2 weeks, which is fairly remarkable. Sir?
So, speaking of medical, so, you know, I went to I had a CFI, I was trying to get my certificate to fly.
Yeah.
And what really stopped me was medical, right? And the first thing that happened to me was that I went to go get my third-class airman, which is no longer required now, you can self-certify. But the first question was, have you had a concussion in like the last year, right?
Yeah.
And I happened to have a mountain bike accident, and I had one.
Sure.
I go in there, I say, yeah, I have one, and he goes, deferred. It took him like 5 seconds, and I'm like, wait a minute, nobody told me that. You know?
Yeah.
So I learned the hard way about some of this stuff. It turned out I went from deferred to denied, and then I appealed, and I actually got the FAA to approve me, and I could finally solo. But that was a long battle, and
Sure.
you know, you're going to have people, they're going to need all of these pilots, right? And the other thing that's a factor that's going to happen here is the medical part of it, because you really have to prove that you're, you know, healthy as a horse, so to speak. And if you're not, they're not going to let you fly, or they'll maybe let you fly, but they're not going to let you fly past them.
One of the really interesting things that are happening, not on air, land, and sea, but it is in the medical realm. AI is taken such amazing leaps. One of our customers at AI Redefined is Eli Lilly. And for Eli Lilly, we've created a hyper-personalized digital twin of every human being on the planet. Well, at least every human being that's willing to provide us their DNA, their biomarkers, and their wearable data. And why is that interesting? Because if you have that environment, you now have a digital twin of a human being that can look at a personalized medical regime that, you know, might differ on a day-to-day basis. So instead of taking 25 milligrams of Lipitor every day, you know, some days that I've exercised beforehand, I, you know, take 22.6, right? And these kinds of leaps, I think, are going to really sort of change, like, how we don't have sort of blanket, you know, you are denied because you had a concussion. No, we're going to actually put you through this kind of digital twin, maybe ask you some further questions, maybe ask you to participate in some tests, dexterity, movement, and the like. But a lot of the sort of blanket style, you know, you're qualified or unqualified, probably are going to go away. right? Because we can get really hyper-personalized. Our first test with Eli Lilly was on women who go through menopause. The average woman to go through menopause looking for hormone replacement therapy, the time to get the right formula is 28 months.
Huh.
Right, so that's 28 months of hell. Right? But could you imagine putting that digital twin up and immediately sort of testing 500 million different iterations of what's going to work for that particular human? Answers in minutes. Husbands that don't have to buy $8,000 refrigerators for the bedroom. Right? Now, some of this is like
Big savings.
big savings, but also big changes, right? And I think that's perhaps the thing that that is most exciting about AI. There's a few things that are a little scary about AI, but they're mostly tied to, like, you know, ugly humanity, right? You know, a kitchen knife is used by 99.999% of people to make dinner. Occasionally it's used to hurt people. AI will have similar kind of, you know, most people will use it for good. A couple of shitheads that won't, and that's kind of scary. Yes?
The pilot thing is intriguing because you use reinforcement learning. So like the pilots that are starting to train these models themselves,
Yeah.
are they worried about their jobs? I guess because like it's just like the taxi drivers, you know,
Yeah.
the Uber, and then now we're gonna have the cars driving around. I'm kind of curious, like, do you see a real future where there's not a pilot somewhere?
I think, you know, there's if you look at sort of military taking the lead, and I sit on the appropriations committee at NPS, and, you know, some of the stuff at Slammer, Slammer is a facility here on the beach that does air, sea, and land interoperability. And if you look at that, you know, there is always probably going to be a human that will and can take charge. We have a program with Thales, 14th largest defense contractor in the world. Thales came to us and said, the Future Combat Air System, it's a, you know, the 6th generation fighter jet for Europe. They came to us and said, you know, we anticipate seeing pilots managing as many as 200 drones, semi-autonomous drones. Right? So not only are we going to have this amazing, you know, fighter jet being able to fly well, but also there's a package of drones to protect and to provide offensive weaponry, etc. And so one of the first things that they came to us on was like, how do we create an AI that that can change based on the cognitive load of the pilot, right? Where it might just be a recommendation engine in a relatively calm environment. As the environment sort of steps up, maybe it takes over some of the lesser tasks. As the environment really heats up, you know, maybe the AI takes over more and more, especially in the orchestration environment. And what's really interesting is, like, and sort of credit to the DoD and their allies in Europe, is like, you know, everybody is pretty cognizant of, like, lethality needs to be a human judgment. It's not always the case, but so far, everything that we've seen so far has been, you know, humans have to make that decision. And that's where it gets a little squirrely, right? But it's really interesting when AI can morph its role based on the exigencies of the human ability to adapt, right? And again, that hyper-personalization of understanding that particular pilot's skills under pressure, strengths and weaknesses in different types of environments. It's really critical, right? Because one size does not fit all. Yeah.
Kind of jumping on what he was saying though, but I'm thinking about the transportation industry. I know a few years back they piloted a semi, right, where it was 100% autonomous, but what's your take on that? Because I know in that space, truck drivers aren't considered highly specialized, but our country's supply chain depends on trucks and roads as opposed to rail systems. But what do you see, or open that one up, because that's huge.
Autonomous transportation is still nascent. There's still challenges to solve. But I think, we're at that sort of point where autonomous vehicles are at parity with human safety. And, there are, that may not be a high hurdle, or a high enough hurdle, but, it is, it's something that I think, we will get a lot better over time. I think, some of this pushing the AI to the edge will help solve a lot of these challenges. Right now, many times communication is to the cloud is a challenge. And so, as these chips, as these GPUs get pushed to the edge, perhaps CPUs to the edge, where they are existing, and we can reuse them for some of these tasks, maybe that becomes really interesting.
Maybe you can put your hat on from the appropriations group.
Yeah.
I find that interesting. So, like you found out, like the DoD is aggressive on AI. It's actually fascinating how much faster they're moving than the commercial market. How are you, or how in that role, how are you looking at like bringing startups in smoothing the process of allowing them to innovate within that environment? Because that's still like
fucking hard.
Yeah. And so like there's so much opportunity, especially in this area. That's like my big push is like NPS is massive, it's sitting right there. And so like it could be
2,000 spies in Craig.
Yeah, that too. But like but it can be like this really interesting like for this local region to allow like some innovation that's
I'm glad to
almost
help
out of bounds.
introduce you to some of the folks there in the foundation.
And I think less for us, like we've already started down that process, but like we were lucky because one, like the co-founder, he knows how to like do this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's like a lot of groups that don't, and so like how to smooth that process so that opportunities. It helps all of us from a national security standpoint. It's what's working.
I think our friends at companies like Palantir and Anduril and Shield AI have really broken through and started to make the DoD pay attention to smaller companies. They still feel much more comfort in doing things with, sort of the primes. I think that will change over time, but this is an entity where, there's no embrace, we joke in Silicon Valley, we embrace failure, we learn from it. That doesn't happen in the DoD, right?
They don't like it.
They don't like that. And so, being cognizant of that, I mean, we have a project with the DGA, the French DoD, where they're looking for an LLM, and their greatest challenge, of course, is like, we have such a hierarchical organization that if the LLM hallucinates or gives us an inaccuracy, we're worried that it taints the rest of AI, and suddenly we aren't deploying AI because we don't have the trust. And that's a real serious problem in that culture. That, you know, we're helping them find comfort around through, you know, interacting with it enough, but it's, you know, humans aren't perfect. In that environment, they want an LLM to be perfect.
It'd be interesting what you could do for it, I guess, like sort of like the R&D dollars that could flow and could help this area, like create a startup ecosystem around these kind of things.
Have you met Danny?
I haven't met him yet. Danny knows my position on this. It's
CSU
neat that you sit on that, that's why I'm kind of advocating. It'd be like really awesome since you have that background to try to.
And CSUMB through IIED, I also sit on IIED for the last 8 or so years. But, you know, there's nice sort of movement between CSUMB's computer science group and NPS. Because, you know, NPS is like, the average age of a student there is 42 years old. Like, these are not, you know, 23-year-old kids. These are folks that, you know, I was the commander of this nuclear submarine, and, you know, okay, you know, these are serious folks. But they have all sorts of challenges that are really unique. This 18-month rotation thing is the most asinine thing I've ever heard of in my entire life, where literally, you know, you might be for 18 months the commander of the nuclear submarine in the Pacific, and you know, 3 days later, after your 18th month, you're now a comm officer in the NSA, and you've had no time at all to brief your replacement, and you now have to learn a completely new job, and everything you learned as a nuclear sub-commander has been lost. It's fucking crazy.
Greg, one thing I just want to add, I think the fact that you and Jason are here, and you're not excuse me, you're not relying on technology to spin out of NPS to do your work.
Right.
Neither is Jason. And so I think that but you're here and you're building a company that theoretically could be affinitized to NPS, it could benefit NPS, and that actually I think is a really interesting model. When I first started thinking about startup ecosystem here, I was really set on it has to rely on NPS technology, and that doesn't work. And it actually I don't think really works that well for UC system either. So what I think does work better is when you have extraordinary entrepreneurs who are here and who are building products that are affinitized to NPS. Really what we need is like how do we have 20 more Craig and Jasons, and that would mean that we would have a startup ecosystem. And so it doesn't think it's going to happen overnight, but like what I don't think we need to have is like 20 companies that necessarily spin out of NPS or are leveraging like tech transitions from NPS. That I don't think is going to happen.
It's also complex for VCs to back up those doing that.
Absolutely.
The licensing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Licensing and IP is just
really gnarly.
really hard.
Yeah, really gnarly.
So it really is easier. But I think they're just going to be conduits that come in.
And NPS has done a remarkable job of, bringing some tech leadership to, sort of help. I mean, the people that are on sort of that appropriations committee that I sit on, the number 8 employee at Google, the number 9 and 21 employees at Microsoft. These are, the senior vice president of security and privacy at Apple. These are senior folks that are, are working there, and so, finding ways in which to help some of the students is also pretty interesting. We have an open source core, and so, one of the first things I sat down with at NPS was like sitting down with the simulation and modeling team called Moves and saying, here's an open source orchestration platform for you to look at using reinforcement learning with human feedback. Suddenly we went from 0 usage at NPS to, we had 30 students working on projects from everything from war games to thermal clothing, all using, various forms of this orchestration capability. There's a lot of resources. Just gotta find them. Thank you so much.
Yeah. That's a meetup. Yeah, that was great. I mean, thought-provoking for sure, really quite fascinating. You know, I'm definitely on the periphery of the deep tech, that you guys are in, but it's so fascinating, and I agree there's so much wonderful potential, and it just, yeah, a lot of questions too. I was on a call today, like a lot of our current work that we're doing with DART is funded by this James Irvine Foundation, which is really worried about the most underserved populations in our state, the people that are very concerned about what these optimizations mean for their future job prospects. And somebody was bringing up this idea of just trying to map the jobs that are likely to be AI'd away, and it, it's kind of just beginning to think about what would that look like even? How could you even do that without knowing the kind of deep insights that you have from doing it? But it's also, I think, a really interesting question to understand, because maybe, I don't know what we would do with that information. Maybe try to funnel people into one of these assisted learning programs. I mean, I think that's that apprentice, AI apprentice. I like that.
Because economic history would tell us in the short run there's some going away, but really what it is going to be is a major transformation.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you identify those jobs that are going to be transformed and assist that transformation, so you don't get the massive dislocation you get in the short run?
Yeah, like the Eli Lilly thing was a good example, right?
Yeah,
Because all of these writers were worried, but all of a sudden their demand for the writing went way up.
It feels like, from a job seeker perspective, you should be more worried about what's going to be the new job that doesn't even exist right now than the ones that will go away.
And I think, we need to sort of rid ourselves of the, we're going to have one job or one career for life, right? We're probably, I don't have kids, but if I did, those children would probably have multiple careers, because they would have to continually learn and continually adapt. And so, even what are colleges doing to prepare students for that new sort of career path they might have, right? Where, today if a child came to me and said they want to grow up and be a lawyer, I'd tell them they were being fucking idiots, because, the reality is, you're a customer service rep at some point, because I can train an AI to write the most perfect contract in the world that has won every case, right? And do so in moments. And so, while lawyers probably have another 5 or 10 years, realistically, over time, that's going to go away. And so a lot of that will change pretty dramatically, from crafting documents to maybe crafting strategies, and understanding customer needs will sort of need to have to, or just become so much more of a priority, as opposed to, sitting down and cranking out documents and contracts and the like.
Being able to interpret or decide, choose what's a quality outcome. I mean, I don't know.
And think about AI discerning truth here soon, right? Kierkegaard tells us that, we all have our own truths, but if we're asking an AI to negotiate a contract with an AI, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the way that we've negotiated it from an adversarial position goes away.
Yeah, just start to look for efficiencies.
We look for efficiencies, we look for benefits, we look for, right, we start to negotiate from a completely different perspective. And I think that's really kind of cool because, you know, if two high-powered AIs are negotiating this, you know, agreement between our two companies, it's going to look a whole lot different than today's negotiation strategy.
Jonathan?
So I went to a pretty fascinating talk down at Middlebury Institute.
Yeah.
And there's a student there, I think he's a doctoral candidate now after he went through the MIS program. And he's a very small part of a large team that are using these large language models, and they're training them on individual countries' nuclear nonproliferation positions. And they go through several, you know, hundreds of iterations of this. And then they have the models debate each other. And as an academic exercise, they come out remarkably close, you know, in a matter of minutes probably at this point, to what the countries themselves negotiated over a matter of months, you know, having people sit in a room. So if you can do that ahead of time and bring those together, and then the very smart people who end up in those rooms can just talk about the minor differences in their positions. It represents a huge savings, and yeah.
Boom, AI negotiation.
Exactly.
And then you don't need the low band communication system that, you know, is talking to each other, right? Like, talking minutes.
Well, we went to school in California back in the day when you had wood shop, metal shop, learn how to repair a car, you know. We gotta get back to some of those skills too, because AI isn't gonna do that for us. But, you know, I think what somebody said is that, you know, I wanna be an artist and be creative and all this stuff. I don't want AI to do that. I want AI to do the dishes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
But
just
guess
saying,
what?
you know.
Okay.
I have a question, and either of you can tackle it. A lot of technical verbiage that I heard. What do you guys recommend, or like, what's the advice for people who don't have the technical skills you do, but want to get into this space? Because like, I'm hearing you guys talk, and my brain is just like, I understand this stuff. I've read up on it, but I have no skill set in it at all. You know what I mean? And it's fascinating
I think
stuff.
it's so broad though, you kind of have to decide like, what do you want to do? Like what interests you? Like, do you want to be a developer in it? Do you want to just use it? Do you want to invent where it could be used, like a product person, or like be a CEO and drive how it can be leveraged very broadly? So I think you have to decide that first. And then it's
Find a
easier to
problem
guide.
to solve. That's a great place to start, and then like reverse engineer, you know, how you're gonna solve that problem, right? I think that's, you know, technology right now is just a tool, and it's changing so bloody fast that, like, I have this discussion with the team at UCSC and CSUMB. It's like, how, if we're gonna teach, you know, CUDA, which is NVIDIA's machine language for highly scalable applications, and have Python libraries sitting on top of them, you kind of like anything that a sophomore learns by the time they graduate will be 2 years outdated.
Yeah, that's one thing. It's like, it's changing so fast, man.
So my advice is jump in, find a problem, jump in, you know, find people that can help you solve that.
So there's a lot of engineers on the sidelines just wanting things to work on too. So if like you identify that problem and you can encourage them, you can find people that might be inspired by what they do. There's some here.
Come to more meetups.
Yeah, you might be able to find some.
So we're gonna work on a meetup program. So yeah, let's get everyone together more. Yeah, let's do some more of that. because, I think, Jonathan, Mary Jo, we got a great facility here, we got a little team, we got a small team, and, I think if we could.
Just gotta figure out the parking situation.
Yeah.
This is a university
And how
campus.
about-
That's an impossible
And I think the
problem.
private equity company actually owns the
They buy.
parking,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how about
I
the
do.
topics? The topics is always a debate, like, what is the topic for the meetup?
I think that, look, I mean, if we have a screen here, I think someone walking through some of the AI tooling they're using, sort of as an office worker, from a productivity perspective, because not everybody here is an engineer, but all of us are essentially doing office type work, even if it's blue collar context, et cetera. But I love seeing how people are using AI in their workflows. And so like there's somebody in my team who's doing custom GPTs and I wasn't. And I was like, okay, let's rock, and he basically created an enterprise instance for our firm, and he was using it, and he was pulling language from it all the time. And it was really interesting just to kind of see his workflows. And then there were some things I was doing, like I do a lot of cross medium, so I'll take a PDF and then I'll turn this into a memo, turn that memo into a Medium article, turn that Medium article into a video script, like a lot of that. And so, but he wasn't doing that. So I think that's one area where I think it's really beneficial to all of us, because whereas some of these things, like I listen to Jason and, I kind of do one of these, Craig, I don't want to look at his LinkedIn because it's so intimidating, but, but I think we all have some commonalities that would be beneficial in these meetups around that stuff.
That's a good suggestion.
I was gonna say, I came here as a GI, I was offered a package at Fort Ord, right? And I discovered UCSC, and I had, back in those days, you had the whole GI bill, which I think that should really come back, right? Because then you had a way of funding to pay for the school, so that's how I did it. Now, I wanted to be a forest ranger, I came to this area because I love redwood trees, and, all of the natural beauty around here. But then I just fell into the tech world, it was just like right there. And all of a sudden I was thinking, oh, I could never do that. And the next thing I know, I'm getting a software engineering job and I'm working for all these companies and
Yeah.
had a lot of experience. So it's just the will to do it, right? You have to be able to find the will, and we need to be able to fund this so that people can bootstrap themselves up. So.
Dumb question. We're sitting at a UC campus.
CSU.
CSU,
How many, or state campus?
yes.
It's a school.
Yes.
Higher education. How many classes does this campus offer in computer science on AI?
Oh, the answer to that question.
I'm gonna gamble and say
I don't know the answer,
none.
but there's at least 2 or 3 faculty members that,
Yeah.
that I was told to definitely invite.
Mohammed
this thing, so.
is in Egypt this week, but Mohammed teaches 3 or 4 different
Mohammed,
classes.
Sam Ogden, I thought
They're starting a mechatronics
Yeah,
program.
that's right, Megatron.
was.
Megatron,
And that's
Yeah.
Louise.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is I was talking with a teacher who heads a department at the junior college, Cabrillo, just up the ways. And I was asking him, you have a couple of cloud DevOps classes you provide. There's nothing in AI and it's exploding. What are the possibilities that you can offer
So
something
MPC
like
has
that?
has a Python class at $47 a semester.
And
Hartnell's pretty plugged in as well. On the ag tech mechatronics side. I mean, they're way ahead of CSU and mechatronics, but Luis is catching.
And you can also go to deeplearning.ai and
But you're-
offers all of the, it's all.
Hugging
I think
Faces,
the
great
point- The
tutorials.
point you're making, I think, because I think we're all just saying, like, yeah, there are gaps, and getting that next generation workforce is critical.
So I was asking what's gonna take, and he said, my hands are tied. I can't offer anything unless the state says I can offer it. So it seemed to be like the bottleneck was not so much on campuses, but state guidelines. So what has to change?
Well, and this goes back to Craig's theme and what Craig and I were talking about, which is, this is the wrong institution. This institution moves in decades, it doesn't, and we've gone through a transition in the last 2 years from, oh my God, AI, our students are gonna be cheating, to, oh my God, AI, we should probably be teaching them how to use it, to, if I were to decide, because I'm now retired from the university, to create a course in AI now, it would be at least 2 years before that course could be launched to go through the process. This institution is not designed to react fast.
Well, community colleges are similar, I think I mean.
They're a
most of
little
them-
easier,
They're a
but-
little easier if you have industry-funded training programs or philanthropic-funded training programs, but those are, you know, they look for things like, how many people are you gonna hire, how many people per, you know, does it cost to train, okay, let's make sure we got the funding for that, that's kind of how those work. And otherwise, yeah, there is a 2-year kind of time frame, but there's more than 2 years, because there's a bit of a like you have to bring that idea to a level of get enthusiasm for it, and then define it, and then they can work it through a certification type process. So yeah, it's not designed for the rate of change, it's a process.
Coursera, edX, they're great
Yeah.
solutions.
Well, I wasn't talking about for me, I was talking about the next generation of,
I think to your point is like
Where
what
we're
you
going.
mentioned earlier with the stapler thing, but that's how schools are set up, like, hey, you wanna teach these kids this thing, but these regulations and policies and liabilities don't let you move it up by months. Hence the 2-year, the bottleneck.
I mean, I think I think the point Craig's making is like, I think our students are seeking outside the class to get that content, and I think we all are too, right? Because we're not getting taught this stuff. We're not sitting in Hartnell and in Cabrillo, so I think we kind of know as the so-called the modern office worker that our competitor is using these tools. I just assume. And so then the question is, how do we kind of, you know, keep that pace? So I think we've entered a new phase of the criticality of self-driven learning, and it's just never felt more important to me around self-driven learning.
But I think these two guys give you great advice. Find a problem, and then start figuring out a way to solve it. And that, you'll stumble upon tools or tool sets to use and invest in, and
Well, it seems like we could go on for hours talking about this subject. I hope we have another chance to do so. I think we've had a good session here. I actually I was a little, sometimes we try to have like a big lineup of speakers, and I actually like just fewer.
A lot more conversation
Yeah,
going.
it's actually better, so maybe we'll take some page out of that, but we could probably continue the discussion at Danny's Thursday night meetup at the Hacienda and Hay Barn place.
Yeah, 5:30, Hacienda Hay and Feed, and you should be able to find the group of techies from the trivia folks, I think. A lot more Patagonia in Vest. It's in Carmel Valley.
A lot more Patagonia.
Yeah,
It's another tough drive down. But anyhow, thank you all for coming, and tell your friends, and we'll see you